Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 11 team selection. And it's an interesting team selection here because I do think that for the first time in a few weeks, I actually am really struggling to make a move. So I will be suggesting different options that I'm going with and the reason why I have such a conundrum in my head. But before we jump into that, I'd like to just go quickly through the Game Week 10 review and also use this time to actually shout out anyone who's subscribed to the channel. So 50% of viewers are still unsubscribed. The other half, of course, are subscribed. So if you've enjoyed the content so far, enjoyed watching the team selections and the cheat sheet series, things like that, please do feel free to subscribe because it does help support the growth of the channel and my producing of content. As far as Game Week 10, going back to that, we had 74 points. So that shot us, as I said, to 626,000 in the world. And that's a really good game week because I felt like I've been stuck in the mud for a couple game weeks now, and that's going back to a really poor game week 6 wildcard that I think had me with 8 to 9 million game week in rank, and that wasn't great. So with Flecken, we know what happened with Flecken. I won't touch on that. That was just depressing for a Monday night. As far as Davis, Lewis, Guardiola, happy with Davis and Guardiola. Clearly holding Davis for the good fixtures made sense, but looking at Ipswich and their expected goals conceded, he's clearly a problem where I think that there's so many good game weeks on paper for Leif Davis that look green in the future, where ultimately I'll just have to say to myself, I need a goal from Leif Davis to really get any sort of return from him, because it's hard to almost imagine Ipswich keeping a clean sheet, even though they have done so, I think, once this season already versus Brighton, for example. So that's sort of my thoughts. Clearly, he can produce bonus points. He's been in touching distance, I believe, within the Aston Villa game, within the Fulham game as well, and that's positive. But ultimately, they do concede a lot of chances per game, and I don't think that there's too much that's really stopping Ipswich from doing that. We've seen some absolutely ridiculous expected goal conceded tallies, and I don't think that will change too much. And it's going to be hard to envision me playing him even though there's green fixtures, because for me, the only good fixture in the distance is actually going to be Crystal Palace at home and arguably Wolves away, where I still think they're going to be conceding 2 goals in that game, or that at least is my expectation. As far as for Lewis, we're starting to see with Walker back in the squad that the right back minutes are going to be challenged. Lewis can clearly play in multiple positions. We've seen that already. But my question is going to be, for the next few games, those are clearly Walker right back games. And a great post on Twitter that I think anyone can have just a quick read on. And obviously, please do follow Luke on Twitter. But Luke can be found on DIS_FPL. He does frequently share his thoughts on Man City, and I think his sort of take here is, generally speaking, for the right back minutes, you'll see that Walker is expected to play in the Brighton game, the Spurs game, and the Liverpool game, which makes sense given the sort of threats display, how much you expect, I guess, City will be on the ball for, how often they'll have to deal with transition threats, etc., that sort of thing. So yes, of course, Lewis can still play in some of these Walker designated games, as Luke suggests, but there's a lot of threat to his minutes, and that's why he could be a future transfer out for myself, just like Leif Davis. For Guardiola, he's just extremely impressive, clearly overperforming some sort of savant footballer who's playing left back but scores ridiculous goal tallies from like nonsense, like super low expected goal tallies. But hey, that's Guardiola, and I can only accept good luck when I receive it. As far as in the midfield, I'm happy with the team that I've moved into, and that's clearly with 2 free transfers, moving out of Holland and Dibbling into Salah and Cunha. Dibbling was benched, so that's an additional positive, but clearly the captaincy swing really went my way. Son's minutes were much more reduced than I thought. 55 minutes was not great. When I was watching the game, I was expecting, with the Son assist, with more minutes to go, that Son could probably even produce more, but Ange, went by sports science, and I think that's very fair. He needs to manage Son, and Son has also played 45 minutes within the European match versus Galatasaray, and he's come out unscathed. So I think that we're set for the weekend where he's probably going to be playing something like 70-75 minutes. Probably a huge improvement from last week, but still nothing close to what his peak fitness would be like. And with Mbumo and Palmer, happy with these players. Mbumo still has a good run ahead, and Palmer only has a great run ahead, whereas Mbumo, I would say, in the short term has a great run of fixtures, but that clearly becomes really poor as soon as game week 14 rolls its head around. And I think that some people will probably see Mbumo as a bit of a season keeper, but arguably he could also be soon a transfer out if we can sort of believe it. As far as the forward positions, I think I'm very happy with Selction and Cunha, and that's clearly, of course, we react to results in FPL and football. Selction being in good positions, scoring chances, even though he still does the thing of operating deep, linking up, play as part of Tottenham's attack. What the point that I made was probably over the last few weeks is Tottenham are still a very, very strong attack. And so just being a center forward within attack is a good thing. And the only thing I'd say about Selction, just like I said in the transfer plans video, is we can react to 3 game week sample sizes, but when we have more sample size, we should just probably average out our expectations. So whilst it has been really poor before this game, looking at Selction, I don't think I was as worried as, for example, someone like DCL, where the difference is Solanke's performances were good from a managerial perspective and his minutes remain good, whereas Calvert-Lewin's clearly struggling to finish, yes, which is just standard for him. But second of all, there is a bit of a lack of faith now, and I think his minutes have sufficiently reduced to where a lot of people probably have already transferred him out. Rage transferred him out or transferred him out, but either way, I imagine Calvert-Lewin's not on many teams. He's probably going to price fall one more time, and he's clearly one of the question marks for my team, whereas I'm happy with Cunha and Selction, as I said. As far as the bench, Rodgers playing him over Calvert-Lewin didn't really come across my mind just given the fixtures, but ultimately Rodgers has been a very solid asset. One thing I'd also say is he has clearly overperformed a little bit this season, and that's totally fine. I mean, we want our assets to overperform. All I'll say is that the minutes recently have been poor, and I do think that that could be another reoccurrence on this weekend here, where even in some of the previous matches we've seen, for example, 56, 65-minute substitutions for Rodgers, and I do think that that's likely. And given that the fixture is Liverpool away, that question of whether I play Calvert-Lewin and Rodgers is once again on the top of my mind. And Gabriel, I'm looking forward to his fixture run ahead from Gameweek 13 plus, but it seems like I'll have to call upon him this game week, and Dunk is still seemingly out for the Man City game. So a little too soon for him, but as long as he makes it for Game Week 13, I'm happy to own Dunk in the future. So as far as my Game Week 11 team selection, I'm going to quickly discuss option number 1, which is actually simply rolling. Rolling makes sense to me because, once again, an international break is around the corner. I'm a little bit uncertain about what moves I want to make outside of the one force move I feel in my head, which is Son to Saka in Game Week 12. I have a couple issues in my team, and I have a couple doubts on some of the transfers in. And that will go to options 2 and 3 later, and why I might prefer rolling, because I'm not 100% sure about options 2 and 3. The reason why this is the case is option 2, and I'll spoil this early, is to go from Lewis or Leif Davis into Dalot. And then option 3 is to make one free transfer again, to go from Calvert-Lewin to Welbeck. Rolling means I don't do any of these moves, but I'll quickly discuss why I really like rolling. Rolling will probably allow me to ignore Welbeck and ignore Dalot, or even, let's say, Mazraoui, if we want to use him as another example of a United defender that we can go into with a great fixture in hand, probably has good minutes in the weekend, probably will start, but we're uncertain about what is going on with Amorim, right? With Amorim coming back in, or coming into United, I do think he's going to play a 3-4-3. I still think that Garnacho is going to play potentially a left wing back position. And then we know that Malacia and Shaw are not too far away from the team, but clearly have had such extensive injuries. It's going to take a while. And probably if you wanted to maximize the United games, you could actually maybe get away with both Dalot and Mazraoui in theory. My question is, Dalot hasn't been playing perfectly so far, and I still think that Mazraoui can play in the wing back position. So potentially they are still competing for a spot, although there's even a world where maybe one of them plays right center back. And that's plausible to me. I know some people find that hard to believe, but they also lack a little bit of center back depth, although Lindelof is back in the team and Euro is clearly maybe close to getting back to full fitness within 2 to 3 game weeks time after the international break. And that probably is, once again, coinciding with the end of the great United fixture swing, which is three good fixtures in a row up until Game Week 14, where ultimately for defenders, we don't care about rotation so much because we almost expect it. But if you own, let's say, United attacker, that's probably when you'd sell them once again. So when I look at my team, I think that's one of the questions I have. I can't guarantee Dalot's minutes this weekend under Rude, who was subbed off quite early versus PAOK. And I think that could happen again potentially on the weekend with Mazraoui playing well. and his minutes probably being safer, but then I feel like his minutes under Amram could be contested once again. As far as alternative transfers in the defensive position, Porro is one of the transfers that I'm thinking about. And Porro is someone that I thought about but closed my mind to, because that would block me from Son to Saka, regardless of whether I go out of Lewis or leave Davis. So that's why I'm not really too keen on Porro. If I was to roll, I would be playing Flecken versus Bournemouth at home. I'd be playing Lewis and Guardiola versus Brighton away, and Gabriel versus Chelsea away. So clearly a very, very poor defense on paper. But unless I had Trent, I don't think many other defenses are that much better. Ryan Aït-Nouri clearly has a great game as well. But speaking back to, for example, a team like Ipswich and even like Leif Davis, for example, I still think that Wolves are a very, very poor defense too. And I don't see too much separating really Leif Davis and Ryan Aït-Nouri. So I don't really like bringing in two types of players of that sort of quality, where I think, yes, of course, I want to play them when they play versus other relegation teams at home, but it's unlikely that I'll be playing them too much in the future when I actually have a strong defense on paper. Now, clearly, Man City defense is getting worse, but I guess we can also say that Guardiola's an attacker, so that's a positive. So Lewis is probably the question mark in my team, and I'll have to make a judgment call when I'm rolling as to whether I think Lewis will start, because if I think that Lewis will be benched, and I'm leaning towards that sort of thinking, it probably still makes sense for me to make a defender transfer, but I'll then have to commit to a United defender, which is tough. The only alternative that I've really thought about is maybe going straight to someone like Lewis Hall, but I think that there are a couple injured Newcastle players who might come back into the team soon, and there could still be a little bit more rotation in the left back position when the fixture schedule gets dense in December, which is not ideal. In the midfield position this week, I'll be fielding Salah, Mbeumo, Son, and Palmer. And the big question mark is going to be who is the captain, who's the vice captain. And to me, that's quite firmly between Salah here and Son. Son has clearly the better fixture on paper, but there's a gulf in quality between, I would say, Liverpool and Tottenham, and probably even arguably between Salah and Son. And specifically their minutes. Salah's minutes look really good. We also know that he's heading towards an international break where he's going to be rested, and it probably is going to be an opportunity here for him to literally play 95 minutes of football, which is huge. Liverpool so far this season have actually been a little bit behind Tottenham in terms of expected goals, but as we know, Salah, of course, is a little bit ahead of Son, generally speaking, anyways, in those sorts of metrics. So I do think with reduced Son minutes, it probably still makes sense to go towards Salah as a captaincy. But one thing that makes me want to go for the Son captaincy is that could be a risk in the sense that I will probably lose, I guess, on expected points to Salah, and that's fine. But it could be a great pun in terms of the ownership aspect, because Salah is most likely going to be the dominant captain this game week. And we don't always love to play one of our players and hope that they fail. But Son has an ownership that is below 10%. Having 200% of a certain player like that could leapfrog me a lot. And I think that's something to evaluate here with a fixture like this. And that's why I'm highly considering a Son captaincy still. But right now, I've got to be honest and say, I've probably played a bit defensive on captaincies this season. And for whatever reason, I just feel like with the minutes once again leaning towards Salah's favor, I feel comforted by the idea of Salah captaincy, and I'll probably stick it to that. And I guess the flip side of that argument is that by not vice captaining Son, I still own 100% of a very low owned player, which is nice. As far as Mbeumo, one thing I wanted to mention about him is that his fixture run in the immediate future is really good, but actually we should all be considering the idea of potentially selling Mbeumo after game week 13, because 14 plus is a really poor fixture run. And whilst we do probably see Mbeumo as one of the almost fixture proof or essential players for now, the reality is that he has been enjoying a very, very good run of games. And we've seen, for example, in some of the tougher matches, some of the tougher performances, less production. And that's just normal. Look at the away fixtures for Mbeumo this season. Look at some of the tougher fixtures. The expected goal involvement numbers are clearly less. And you can see that, for example, within the Liverpool fixture, the City fixture, the even United fixture, or even the Fulham fixture, where he's barely had any opportunities. And that's the reality of tough fixture runs and away fixtures. So those are my thoughts on him. Palmer is a great player. We know that there's a bit of a knock, but I think he's going to be fine. Rested once again for Europe because he's not a part of the squad, and hopefully he should be fit for the weekend. And then in the forward lines, I'll have Calvert-Lewin, Solanke, and Cunha. Now, I have Calvert-Lewin here. Clearly, it means that I've made the decision, if I roll, to play Calvert-Lewin over Rodgers. I will be looking out for any sort of last minute quotes, any last minute news in terms of starts and things like that. If I get any news that Calvert-Lewin gets benched, clearly Rodgers will sort of slot in ahead of him. But I'm still playing the fixture here, in my opinion. 60 minutes of Calvert-Lewin might be just, once again, assuming a lower ceiling for him, which is not ideal. But I do think that Rodgers also has an extremely low floor, once again, this game week. And it's really picking between two duds on paper for me, despite the fact that Rodgers is clearly the much better player permanently, I think, going forwards. So that's sort of an evaluation point there, and why I'm thinking about playing Calvert-Lewin and just rolling this game week so that I can actually maximize 2 free transfers with better information in game week 12. So I talked about option 2, which is, once again, if I come towards the conclusion with the press conference comments, with any sort of additional details we can get from Man City, that I think that Lewis is going to be benched, I think that I would lean towards going for a Man United defender move. And I think my number one choice would still be Dalot, because going towards Dalot doesn't really price block me from any of the other moves I want. Mazraoui might be the more informed player, but I still have the same question marks around what his minutes will be like under Amorim. And ideally, I still want those United players playing the maximum amount of minutes over the next 3 game weeks, which would be the first 2 game weeks under Amorim. So that's something that I've been thinking about, and why I've been a little bit turned off of Mazraoui despite his great performances as of late. So that's something I've been thinking about when it comes to the transfer there in option number 2. As I said, I've given alternatives like Porro, like Hall. I've even mentioned James in the transfer plan, but it's just very hard to see myself going towards for those players now. With Hall, I think there's not enough upside in the immediate fixture. With James, I think the same point there to be made. And with Porro, once again, closed off from Santasaka, which I really want to do. And in option number 3, it is the Welbeck move from Calvert-Lewin to Welbeck. Now, João Pedro's available. My thoughts on Welbeck is that with Brighton actually not being involved in many cup fixtures, I do think that Welbeck's minutes should still remain strong. I'm not expecting necessarily 82 minutes per game for the rest of the next 2 months, which are going to be fixture dense, but there's going to be some periods where Brighton will run into a bit of fixture difficulty, and that happens around the new year. And I think it also happens around the edge of the end of November and December, where there will be effectively 3 games in around maybe 9 days time for Brighton for both those sort of fixture runs. I still think that when you look at the performances that Welbeck has given, the minutes that he's given as well, that he's still more than likely going to be able to comfortably play the minutes that I want as a starter for the key fixtures. And when we look at an interim fixture like the Man City game, probably a couple of weeks ago, we would have looked at it saying, we don't want to be bringing Welbeck versus Man City, but I have to be honest and say Man City's defense looks absolutely awful. And it does look like a great opportunity to play Welbeck. With João Pedro being available, the question is going to be if Welbeck's minutes suffer too much. And I think it will just go back to the start of the season where it's quite probable we'll see João Pedro take away those sort of center forward minutes from Welbeck at the last 10 to 15 minutes of a match. And we see someone like Rutter play in the 10 or an alternative setup that allows for João Pedro to push up into that center forward position, which I think is very probable. Rutter's played really well, and I think his spot in the team is definitely almost held there, whereas Minte is still out of the team, I believe. And in theory, you could still see Rutter, João Pedro, and Welbeck coexist with Minte being out, so that you can see almost an attacking 4 of Mitoma in the left, Welbeck in the center forward position, João Pedro in the 10, and Rutter almost as a right winger. So that's my thought as to what Brighton could field for the next few weeks. But of course, if Minte comes back and there's more players coming back into the team, and we know that there's a strong bench, the question mark is always going to be around Welbeck's minutes and João Pedro's minutes, which I do think is something that I find hard to reconcile with bringing Welbeck in this week, other than just to avoid a Calvert-Lewin drop. The alternative move is simply to go towards someone like Chris Wood as well, who simply has great games on game week 11 and 13, and actually rotates really, really well with Rodgers. The only thing pulling me a little bit back from the Wood move is that Rodgers' minutes have become a little bit worse. So if I really want a forward, I'd ideally still like them to be able to play over Rodgers in certain weeks if I'm unsure about Rodgers' minutes. And I don't want to just rely purely on rotation as well, given that I know that my defense is quite thin for now, and that's not ideal. So those are my thoughts currently in terms of my team. As I said, I've got an option number 1, which is the roll, which I think feels safe for heading towards international break, and considering I feel like I have a forced move of Santasaka. On top of that, I've got option number 2, which is to head towards Dalot. My plan would be to do that through Leif Davis. And then option number 3 is to simply change Calvert-Lewin for Welbeck and play it like that, which would also, I think, part of the reason why I don't really like that move is that closes off the option of Calvert-Lewin to João Pedro on game week 13 for me, which ultimately I still want that optionality. If I go for Welbeck now, I close that door for me because I can't see Welbeck to João Pedro, that sort of sideways move being made for myself. And that's why this week has been a very tough team selection for me. But a lot of things are still in the balance, and we have a lot of information to get from press conferences, potential leaks, and things like that. It is going to be a little bit of a later deadline this game week here. So it's going to be a 1:30 p.m. UK time deadline. And all the matches at 3 p.m. unfortunately are not going to be too helpful for myself because Brighton and Man City actually happens to be the game after that. And a lot of my moves are centered around either United player who plays on Sunday, although I'm not really worried about the interim minutes. It's about the minutes after international break for them. And clearly, of course, some question marks to be raised on availability of players from Brighton and Man City. And potentially, it might be the case that on the deadline, I wait for a move or potential news, for example, from someone like Tony that we can find on Twitter, and he confirms that someone like Lewis is benched. And that would be a big piece of news that would push me towards one direction with certain moves. It might also be the case that we get some better news on João Pedro or some worse news on João Pedro, which could also push me within a certain direction for Welbeck right now. But that's the team selection. Hope you guys have a wonderful game week. Appreciate that it's tough to sort of see what the transfer plans are. But I think one thing about FPL is that you always know you can go multiple different ways on any certain game week, and that can completely change the rest of your season. So a tricky time, but I hope you guys appreciate some of the insights in terms of the options. Let me know what your thoughts are on them as well. Hope you guys have a wonderful game week. Take care and goodbye.